Hi, this is Mike Fenn, and today we're going to talk logistics. Just really quickly, the almond industry relies quite heavily on our export markets, which means we rely quite heavily on the global supply chain. And to put that into context, the almond industry exports anywhere from 67 to 72% of our total yearly shipments. And as we're trying to dive into what were the reasons that we've kind of gotten to where we are logistically, we were kind of scouring the internet for papers, articles. We came across one that I really liked, and it's called Containergeddon. It is written by a UC Davis professor, Dr. Colin Carter, and two of his colleagues. And I kind of want to just quote one part of it, and then I'll introduce Dr. Colin Carter. And I quote, "It has taken a supply chain crisis to fully reveal that California has inefficient port operations, even compared to ports in East Africa and Russia." That's pretty shocking. And so to help unpack all of these concepts, we have invited Dr. Colin Carter on to come in and speak with us. And just a little resume of Dr. Colin Carter. He has published more than 130 papers. He has authored or edited 15 books. He is published in the areas of international trade, commodity markets, agriculture policy, futures, and options markets. And it is our pleasure and honor to have Professor Colin Carter on with us today.
Good afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon. So what got you guys started with kind of identifying, you and your team identifying, we need to shed a little bit of light on what's going on here?
Well, Mike, going back almost a year now, at least last spring, the newspapers almost every day had a story about problems with supply chains and inability to obtain goods. And even 60 Minutes, the TV show, did a documentary on the supply chain problems. And they talked about the inability to get Christmas gifts, inability to get camping equipment, computers. I watched that entire program, and they never once mentioned agriculture. And to me, this was a great omission, because the supply chain is so important to California agriculture. Right. So I decided that it's probably time somebody look into this issue from the perspective of the California farmer.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it. I mean, again, it's something that, I was getting into a debate with Lewis Gill, our farm manager. He kept asking me, why isn't anybody talking about this? Why hasn't there been anything? So I've been sharing your article around our office. And so maybe that's a good place to kind of pick that up. I mean, could you maybe start with, where were we before, COVID kind of happened logistic-wise, maybe globally, and then kind of how did we kind of melt down to kind of where we are today?
Well, Mike, I'm sure you've heard the term globalized economy. So before COVID, we were becoming more and more interdependent with other countries, and we were truly a global economy. And this was facilitated to some extent by lower transportation costs, e.g. the container, right? The shipping container. Right. These containers we see on the highways, on the trains, it was developed by a guy called Malcolm McLean back in the 1950s. He was a truck driver frustrated with congested roads on the eastern seaboard, and he decided there was a better way to do this. So he came up with the idea of this homogeneous metal box that he could put on vessels and move his product up the eastern seaboard. And that's when it started. But it really took the Vietnam War to allow the containerization to really take off. And it was because of the U.S. government's need to move, equipment over to Vietnam that the containers really came into fruition. So with the advent of the container,
that's interesting.
We see that goods we purchase today probably have been on many different containers. In fact, something like 60% of the value of goods that we purchase arrive via container. I mean, look around your living room, look around your room, you know. Almost everything here arrived to California via container.
So it's the lifeblood of basically our way of life, getting everything to us.
It is.
Yeah.
And many countries are involved. So I've got my iPhone here. Approximately, there's a lot of components in this little device, right? And approximately 40 countries supply parts for the iPhone. So those products are coming from different countries to be assembled, all via container. You know, those of us in agriculture, we have work boots. So if you buy a pair of work boots, Mike, you go down to the local store, you probably don't think of where those boots came from, but chances are they were assembled in a place like Bangladesh, but with components from 7 or 8 different countries. You know, so this is where we were heading before COVID, and it made us very reliant on the supply chain running smoothly.
I kind of never even seen it in our daily life, right? I mean, in your daily life, you would go to the store, you would buy a product, it was always there. You could buy 2, 3, 4 of those things, right? So you never, it was never in the back of your mind that, you know, this could ever be an issue. You took it for granted, I guess.
You took it for granted, that's right. But about a year ago, actually, you might recall the problem on the Suez Canal. Right. There was a large vessel, a very large vessel that was loaded with containers. The
Ever Given, I think.
Ever Given, that's right. And it got crossways in the Suez Canal, blocked the canal for a week or 10 days. Around 12% of global shipping goes through the canal. So those 10 days caused over 300 ships to be stalled outside the canal. Amazing. And for them to find an alternate route would take an extra week or 10 days. So that one little incident with the ship in the canal had repercussions around the globe in terms of, we heard people here talking about unavailability of products because of what happened in the Suez Canal. Well, that was really a precursor to what we've seen in the last 9 to 10 months that you were talking about. Yeah. It was a precursor because the Suez Canal is what we call a choke point in the supply chain. And we have a few other choke points we're going to talk about later, I think.
Wow. So then all of a sudden, okay, we're, you know, we have, you know, the kind of the foreshadowing of a logistical crisis on the horizon with this Ever Given. Now all of a sudden, you know, COVID starts to hit. We have these different lockdowns that are in place, not only in the United States, but kind of globally. How did that then, you know, for me, the hard thing to comprehend is even when those lockdowns were happening, we were still able to ship, right? So we were able to, you know, hit pretty big records even throughout this kind of the height of COVID. But what kind of then caused that slowdown or for the exporters in California, you think?
So I first noticed it in the trade data around May of 2021, Mike. And basically what happened was, I will say it now, our ports are choke points. So we had these ports that were known to be quite inefficient, but they could handle the volume that was coming in. What happened during COVID, as you know, is everybody stayed home. We weren't going to restaurants. We weren't going on vacation. You know, some people got money from the government. So savings rates went really high on average. People had extra money. And they decided to do projects at home, maybe build a deck or buy a new computer or, you know, buy something.
Whatever, Peloton.
Whatever. Yeah. And most of those goods came from Asia via container.
Right. So huge demand coming.
Huge demand. Yeah. So that meant the supply of containers coming over loaded from Asia increased. And Long Beach, Los Angeles, and Oakland couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle this. It wasn't a big surge, Mike. It was maybe 20% increase in shipments, but it just created a logjam.
Yeah. So now all of a sudden I have all these containers coming to the West Coast, or so I should even say vessels really kind of coming. So now do I have a long line of vessels that are waiting to be unloaded? I mean, is that what then starts to happen because I can't flip these containers? Is that the part of what starts to develop?
That's right. So those ports were, as I said, inefficient to begin with. It took them maybe twice as long to unload a ship as it would in Yokohama. But yeah, I mean, at one time there were 100 ships waiting offshore, which is unbelievable. But we also saw it in the freight rates. So California agriculture, and especially almonds, is very dependent on the supply chain logistics, very dependent on being able to ship your product in containers. Now, before COVID, we had the nice advantage that this was a backhaul, right? If we're shipping containers back to Asia, that's a backhaul. So the cost of a 40-foot box, the freight cost, was only around $500.
Yeah.
Which is extremely cheap, right? That's less than 2 cents a pound. And coming this direction from China to, say, Los Angeles was around $1,500 before COVID.
Right.
Now, those freight rates from China to Los Angeles went up around eightfold, Mike. They just skyrocketed. And the gap between the rate we pay to go to China, it went up, but not nearly as much. But that gap just widened.
Right.
So there was a huge incentive for the shipping companies to get those containers back to Asia so they could be reloaded and sent back here, which meant that the number of containers that were being shipped back to Asia empty increased from just over 60% to close to 80%. And that really sums up what the problem your growers face. You can't get containers because our biggest export to Asia right now is
air.
Yeah.
So we're sending 8 out of 10 containers being...
For every 10 coming in loaded, 8 go back empty.
Yep.
That's phenomenal.
Wow. And so we also have had problems with vessels kind of just omitting the Port of Oakland, right? We ship out of the Port of Oakland. We're located in Madeira. It's really not that economically feasible for us to ship out of LA or Long Beach. But, for a period of time there, we were getting, blank sailings out of Oakland. Basically, the vessel saying, we're calling LA, we're calling Long Beach, we're not calling Oakland. Why would something like that start to happen?
It was really that spread in the freight rates, Mike.
So they wanted to get back there faster.
That's right.
Okay.
So as you know, prior to COVID, they would call on Oakland on the way back from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And pick up some of your almonds. But now they don't have time to do that because time is money.
Yeah.
So they just steam straight back to Asia.
Yeah.
And they can't be bothered picking up containers in Oakland that are loaded because they can earn so much more bringing back full containers.
Right. So I'm going to take it back. I'm going to skip Oakland. I'm taking the empties back from LA. I'm loading them up in Asia, China, let's say, and now I'm bringing them back to California.
That's right.
Okay. I know we were talking a little bit earlier, and you had mentioned something about the Jones Act. That was something I have not been I was never familiar with. Could you maybe describe what the Jones Act is, and maybe kind of its long-term effect that it's probably been playing in the background as we've been kind of fumbling through this?
Sure. So I think the Jones Act is part of the problem here. The Jones Act is a federal legislation, federal law that goes back 100 years. It was passed 100 years ago. And it was really passed to protect the maritime industry and the railroads. The railroads were big backers of the Jones Act. What the Jones Act specifies that if you ship a product from one U.S. port to another, let's say from L.A. to Oakland, or even from L.A. to Alaska or L.A. to New York, that has to be, under the Jones Act, that has to be on an American ship, American crew, very expensive.
Yeah.
You're talking 2 to 3 times what a competing ship could offer. So what that does, Mike, is it puts a lot of containers, if we just stick to containers, it puts a lot of containers on our highways and on our railroads that would otherwise move on the water. It's very cost effective to move containers on the water, but it's hard under the Jones Act because most of these ships aren't American. So they unload everything in Los Angeles and put it on a rail. And as you know, in the past year, part of the logjam has not only been unloading the ships, but getting the containers out of the Los Angeles basin. And because they are all unloaded and not kept on board and then maybe moved to another port,
it's causing congestion there.
It adds to the congestion there.
Right. So I guess, as you were talking, my question would have been, is it faster to then move the containers via ship from, let's just say, Long Beach to Oakland, or is it more of a, hey, I'm getting way too much congestion now on LA Long Beach, and just because I'm waiting for trucks, I'm waiting for the rail. I mean, should we really be moving containers by vessel? I mean, would that be more efficient, you think?
No question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, be less expensive.
Right.
And we go back to Malcolm McLean, who invented the container, right? He was fed up with being stuck on highways with his trucks.
Got it.
With a container on the back. That doesn't happen on the sea, right?
Right. So that you're more flexible. You can maneuver more. You can basically warehouse it on the ocean if you needed to.
But the Jones Act discourages that.
Yeah. When we talked about that Jones Act, you had talked about some sort of deal where people were going on cruises to Alaska, but they had to start or finish in Vancouver. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I used to go to Vancouver all the time. My son lived there.
Yeah.
And you always see at the airport, thousands of U.S. tourists getting off the cruise ships and getting on an airplane in Vancouver. And somebody asked me, well, why don't they just leave from Seattle,
Yeah.
They don't have to go through immigration in Vancouver, and it's cheaper to fly to Seattle. Well, there's one simple answer. It's the Jones Act.
Yeah.
Those cruise ships can't go from Seattle to Alaska unless they're American.
Right. And I would assume none of them are.
Most of them are.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not saving American jobs
No.
either.
No. So we have the Jones Act. That's that's causing some congestion. What else? I mean, are there other things that have played out during all of this that have kind of backlogged the system?
Absolutely. I think the biggest issue, Mike, has to do with the inefficiency of our ports on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And we knew this before COVID hit. It used to take maybe twice as long to unload a ship here as in most other countries. The World Bank, which is a large agency in Washington, D.C., did a study on ports around the world.
Yeah.
Just before COVID. And it's shocking. You kind of alluded to it, but Long Beach, Los Angeles, Oakland, they're not in the top 10. They're not in the top 50. Sorry to tell you, Mike, they're barely in the top 350 in the world.
Yeah.
340.
That's shocking.
It's shocking.
Yeah.
So you look at ports in East Africa, Russia, they're more efficient. So why is that? Well, I was struck today. You gave me a nice tour. You and Dave gave me a nice tour of your operation, and I was struck how forward-looking you are in terms of adopting the latest technology, as growers and processors. And that is California agriculture. California agriculture really is the gold standard globally in terms of being leaders in the latest technology, the latest innovations in farming. But sadly, down the road at our ports, we are against innovation. We're against adopting the latest technology, basically against automation. That's the problem. And it has to do with the powerful longshoremen. People working on the docks earn a lot more than I do, and it's because of the monopoly associated with the labor unions.
Right. So we're not able to put in better infrastructure, better technologies to be able to get us to maybe even what the East Coast ports would be.
There's resistance to that.
Yep.
So you have the Jones Act creating this congestion. So we've got to get everything on the rail or everything on the roads. Yeah. We can't hop ports, and then you have the high cost of labor preventing the ports from running 24/7,
right,
the way they would in Asia, right?
Yep.
They close down when the sun goes down. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things that make no sense, but it's so expensive to operate those ports with this high-priced labor, and the labor unions are opposed to automating everything.
Yeah.
We could do a lot of this with robots.
Yeah.
And that would match what you're doing here with your farming.
Yeah.
It would match that technology.
Yeah.
Right now, that's a big choke point, and it's a serious mismatch.
Yeah.
That affects all of California agriculture, the entire economy.
And it's not only California agriculture as well, because we're bringing stuff in from the Midwest that's being exported out of California. I mean, we're a large hub for a lot of American agriculture, not just our industry, the almond industry or the tree nut industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of dairy products, a
Right.
lot of meat products go through our ports. And also on the import side, Long Beach and LA alone, I think, account for about 40%
Yeah.
of U.S. imports of containerized products.
And we were talking a little earlier. Dave had mentioned an article that was coming out that Biden had been talking about putting some money behind updating these ports. Do you put any merit in that? Are you familiar with anything going on like that?
Any improvement will help. Any movement towards automation will help. But I will note that President Biden has also expressed interest in investigating monopolies in agribusiness. And he's been talking about the beef industry. I saw a clip on TV where he met with some farmers, and he said, there's only four beef processors in the country. And, we think they're, screwing the farmers and so on and so forth. Well, I would recommend he look into the labor monopolies because I think the farmers are getting a short end of a stick as a result of them, too.
Yeah, I could see that happening for sure. Okay, so we've said just to kind of wrap it up a little bit, we've said a higher savings rate in the United States during COVID basically encouraged people to buy more products because of lockdowns, and we have more money, creating higher demand for containers coming from Asia, therefore raising the freight rates from Asia to the West Coast, incentivizing the ship lines to turn as many empty containers around as fast as possible to maximize that freight rate. So that has been one of the key points. Up to 80% of the containers leaving the West Coast are empty.
Today they are.
Today, 80% are empty. So that's taken a lot of our ability to ship. The Jones Act clogging up, creating congestion in the system has also been at play.
And that feeds on the higher freight rates, too, because we can't turn these containers around.
Right. It's creating a shorter supply of available containers.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a inefficient port system on the West Coast due to a labor union issue that will be probably quite difficult to address. Is there anything else that we can add to this that you could say, hey, look, I could really point to this thing or that thing, or have we pretty much covered it?
You covered it. And in the article you mentioned, we measured the impact on California agriculture using statistics. And we found that starting back in May of 2021 through the end of that calendar year, that's where the data allowed us to draw the line, that loaded containers with agricultural products were down close to 20%, Mike, out of these ports. because the empties went from 63 to 80.
Right.
So you just think about that. What does that mean for you? I know that you're frustrated you can't get containers, but it also means there's less product getting out, which means the price in this market has to be lower. So it's farmers can not only export their product, but their price is lower. Inventories are building as a result,
Yep.
and that's going to be a drag on prices for next year.
And, we continue to try to corner you to tell us, okay, what really, there's things at play that have brought pricing to where they are today. Let's just say it's $1.68 average. I mean, could we say that our price is depressed 20 to 30 cents? Is it hard for you to say? I mean, we keep saying logistics. We are in this situation because we can't ship. How do we put a monetary value on something like that? Can you do that? Would you even be willing to speculate at something like that?
Well, this is what I can say, Mike, is I think the high cost of labor at the ports, the Jones Act, is costing your growers money.
Yep.
And as I said, you're doing everything you can to improve the efficiency of production, but we've got that choke point, which is problematic. What's the impact cents per pound? That's hard for me to say. I haven't measured it, but 20 cents I don't think is a crazy figure. It's probably in that range.
Yeah. And actually it's, so, okay, our market dynamic of supply and demand is off kilter because of our inability to, fully service our entire market, which would be the export side of the market. But it's also affecting a grower's profitability because I would have to think a lot of the active ingredients in the farm inputs are probably being imported. Right, and so they're being faced with those. Their prices are higher. I mean, I know that Dave put out a video recently, kind of breaking down a farm budget, and said, okay, here's these large pieces of the pie of your expenses of your inputs, and here's fertility. It's up 64%. Right, and I would have to again think it's because there's a higher freight rate coming from Asia to the United States, and I don't know this for a fact, but I would have to assume a lot of those inputs are being imported. And so not only is it suppressing our effective market price, but it's also increasing our farm inputs. So unfortunately, growers are being squeezed from both sides. So logistics is something that we hope to see get better. And in your opinion, do you see it getting better anytime soon?
Well, I think we have to start by identifying the problem first, right? And some people want to blame China. It's not China's fault.
No, it's our fault.
They want to blame the shipping lines. There's not enough shipping lines. Well, there are 11 shipping lines. Yeah. Right. Joe Biden's worried about 4 beef packers. There's 11 shipping lines. There's sufficient competition there. It's the 3 ports, Mike. And if you shut the lights off at 6 o'clock at night and nothing happens overnight, it's no wonder we're not able to export our almonds.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've pretty much covered it, unless you have any other topics you'd like to bring up in regards to that. But I think we've pretty much rounded it out quite well. So thank you very much for your time and coming down here and spending some time with us.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.